It is my privilege and joy that we can continue our study about the least of these. And we have today the subtitle Sabbath, a day of freedom. We have studied so far to see why do we have so much undescribable suffering and misery in the world. Because man believes he's God and uses all resources of God for himself. That's our answer. That's why we have sickness. That's why we have poorness. That's why we have war and death. That's why we have strife and conflicts in the family. And that's why we have a broken earth, an environment that we destroy. We have seen that there are three groups that are suffering. The first group is those that originate, that had caused the suffering. It was Lucifer, a third of the angel, Eve and Adam. They are suffering the consequences of their choices. But since they are put into an environment, there are parties involved that are affected without a choice. And that's the whole universe. That's the plants and the animals. They must suffer without a choice. And there are all the people that are born to Adam and Eve. They are born in suffering. They have no choice for it. And they would have not come into this state if God would have not had something much better out of this. And then the one that suffers most is God himself, because to him everything comes back. He is connected to every one of us. And so he is willing to suffer if just we would come out of the error of our mind. Now the cause of suffering is the broken law. And God gives suffering a purpose. God would have not allowed suffering to exist if he would have not given suffering a purpose. And suffering has the purpose, and God has an interest that each being that is gifted with reason and can recognize the consequence of the breaking of the law, it must be seen for everyone in the universe. It must be seen that we have no strength at all in ourselves. And this cannot be taught without suffering. You see, when man lies in bed, helpless, he realizes that he is helpless. But he is helpless even then when he thinks he is not helpless. When he thinks the resources that he uses are from himself. So God must bring suffering in the lives of humans to show them that they have no power in themselves. He must show that love can endure suffering and injustice, but not forever. He wants to prove that while he endures the suffering and the injustice, that it is no worth, it is no good thing that suffering should exist. And a life of suffering is for sure not something that is desirable by none of us. And there is an interest in God through suffering to show that there is no alternative source for life and fulfillment than God. So that's why now the question is, what has the Sabbath to do all with this? Let's review and see the conditions for the removal of suffering and then answer this question. The cause must be recognized. I must see that I am poor, miserable, blind, imprisoned, and oppressed. This must be known to me. And how shall God do it except through infliction of suffering? Yes, he governs it all. If not, we would be death. But he just let it come into our lives to open our eyes about our real state, that we are born in a miserable situation. The second condition for the removal of suffering is the cause must be removed. But this is only possible if I cooperate. That's why the suffering needs to show me the cause and help me to cooperate with Christ. So I am a God, that's the cause of all suffering. That must be crucified and it must be exchanged with the real identity that I am a creature of God, with the truth about me. And that must happen daily. I must see where my nature betrays me and how I have to take away the lie and put the truth instead. That's a process of cooperation between me and my Savior, who through the Holy Spirit works in my heart. Now, to remove the suffering and its consequences, it's a recreation. That's why we must be born again. And God will recreate the earth and all the environment when man was recreated, when the inner life, when the wrong identity was expelled. Now, what has that to do with Sabbath? To understand that, let's look a little bit back to the creation of earth and man. We remember, and I hope you see this graphic, that there are two circles, one over the other. I could not show how Christ and his Father are one, how they are God, and it is the way I thought it best to fit. So Christ and his Father are one. And through Christ, God created everything. So Christ is the creator of the earth and of man. So the Bible says there's nothing that is created is not created by him. So prior to creation, we find in the Bible it's darkness. And on the first day, he creates the light. And he separates light from darkness and says, light has 12 hours and the night has 12 hours. And so he creates the 24-hour day. Then on day second, he creates heaven, and he separates the waters above and the waters below. And of course, the earth was covered with water, but I had somehow to show it this way. So here is heaven and earth created. And then on day 3, he separates the water from the earth. And so the earth come out, and we have sea, the water sea, and the earth. And then God says that plants should exist on earth, and they were there. On day 4, he creates the sun and the moon and stars. And some people wonder how God creates first the light and then he puts the lamp. Yes, because light is not by the sun. The sun is just made to shine, like our lights are made to shine. They have no light in them. They need a power for that to take in order to give. But God always creates like that. When you see it, he creates something and then he puts the last of the creation to govern over it. So now the sun was made to govern the earth, and moon and stars to govern the night. He creates then on day 5 the animals of the sea and the animals on the land and the birds. And he creates on day 6 Adam and Eve out of Adam. And he creates them for a purpose. You see, on day 6 he creates humanity, but now he gives humanity the whole responsibility for what he created. So now Adam, who was created after the sun, who was created after the animals, becomes their boss. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? So God creates everything with a purpose. And then comes day 7. And on day 7, God looks like creates nothing, but he creates the Sabbath, the birthday. He rested from the act of creation. Now, to understand what it means to rest from the act of creation, we must really be able to study and to understand the law. God never does anything without a purpose. Now, did he create the light with a purpose? Did he create the darkness with a purpose? Did he create heavens, the earth, the waters, the sea, the plants, the sun, the animals, Adam? Did he create everything with a purpose? Yes. God never does anything without giving anything a purpose. Now, what is the purpose of the Sabbath? Because he did not create anything on the Sabbath, but the Sabbath. So from Mark 2:27, from the Creator himself, while he was on earth, he said, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. That's very, very important to understand. Was made for man. So obviously God did not rest for himself. And this rest is not that he needed rest. It was just that he just created a day for a purpose. For the purpose of man. But what man? What kind of a purpose was he made for? We find in Genesis 2:2-3, and on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So do we see here a purpose? It looks like the purpose of the Sabbath is just to rest. But it is a frame of time that he put there. He put in the frame of time light and night, day, light and darkness. He put in time everything, but now he puts nothing in the time. In the seventh day, he puts nothing in time, just the time frame. But there must be a cause for that time frame. And then we find in the Decalogue, in the Exodus 20, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, neither you and none other. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So what's the purpose? In Ezekiel 20:12-20. Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them, that thou may know that I am the Lord your God. Now here we come closer to a purpose. It's a sign. It's a sign between me and them or you, that I am sanctifying you and that I am your Lord and God. So let's put them all together. What is the purpose of the Sabbath? If I'm a creature of God, God has made me, then the purpose of the Sabbath is my identity. The Sabbath is a time frame to remember who am I. It was not made for God. It was made for me. It was that day that God gave mankind, not the earth, mankind. Only to man was Sabbath made, not for the animals. They don't need to rest, so to say. They have no conscience. They have no conscious identity. Oh, the Sabbath was made only for man. Even though some people come today and think the animals have also some 7-day cycle, that might all be, but Sabbath is for a moral being that can be conscious who it is, that God is my identity. That's the only reason for the Sabbath, to show to whom I belong. That's why God gave the Sabbath is not a law, so to say. The Sabbath is a created thing in which the human remembers who he is. It's a time frame left out of any duty, so to say, of work. Or that we might understand that Sabbath is the sign of who am I. It's my identity. And you will see it's always the same through the whole Bible. So the Sabbath was made that I should know who I am. Now, Adam and Eve broke the law. They knew they are creatures of God. They mistrusted God because they wanted to be like God. They wanted to have an other identity. And so they were transformed. They thought now in their hearts, I am God. Now, if they are God, they lose God as their identity. God is no longer their identity. And if God is no longer their identity, Sabbath has no meaning for them anymore. Why should you keep Sabbath if God is not your creator? If God is not your identity, if you have made yourself, why should the Sabbath matter? That's why today is it not obvious that humanity are so separated from God, I mean Christians especially, that they cannot even understand this most simple thing, that Sabbath is a creation. It's not an institution that is just set there for a while. No, it was put in the frame of this earth as a continual remembrance that God and I belong together, that I am His creature. Today, Sabbath doesn't matter. People say, what does it matter which day I keep or whatever it is? Because they have not seen that if He created in the first day the light for a purpose, and it comes back and goes day by day, now He created a time frame in which the sun and moon and everything exists, but there is nothing created except the day. Except the day. And that's why people today are totally ignorant what's the purpose of the Sabbath. And that's why it has no meaning for them. So it is very important for us to understand this, that Sabbath and identity is linked together. So it is linked together with salvation, with liberation, with being freed from every suffering. Now, to see this, it is good to have an overview, and I want to show the history of the weekly Sabbath and God's plan of redemption. Here we have the timeline of the 7,000 years. We have the first thing, that Adam's separation from God. We have the flood. Between we have Enoch and Noah. Then we have Abraham, the 12 tribes of Israel, the Exodus from Egypt, then the first coming of Christ, the death of Christ, the 12 apostles, the end time. Then we have the second coming of Christ, the millennium, the 1,000 years of Sabbath, so to say, and the final judgment. And now we want to see how the Sabbath developed, or how the history of the Sabbath went through all this 7,000 or 6,000 years. So Sabbath is a creation of God. It's an institution. It's part of the week. But nothing was created in that day except the day. Because it has to be remembered. Who am I? And since Adam broke the law, Sabbath lost its meaning. And in the time of the flood, when God had to destroy them, probably no one was even remembered it. There might have been a few. We don't know if Noah kept the Sabbath or not. We can assume it, but we don't know. Of course, after the flood, deprivation and people went worse than before. And so God chose Abraham. And then when He brought out of Egypt His children, He gave them in the desert the Sabbath. It's here the first time that God speaks all the 10 commandments, in which the fourth commandment is central, the most longest one. And it is there. And God gives them the Sabbath in the desert. Not only the Sabbath as the law, but even before the law, He gives them the manna and shows that the manna falls only on 6 days, not on the seventh day. So He wants to teach them something. For what purpose was that seventh day created? So that it should be filled with the right thing. It should fulfill its purpose. But the Israelites didn't understand the cause. They didn't understand. And so it went up as some were reformed and back and forth. And of course, maybe some were always faithful in that. But now comes Christ to the earth. When he comes to the earth, the Sabbath is a terrible thing. That is, it is not that the Sabbath was made for man, it's now that man was made for the Sabbath. They did rules and rules and rules, and the Sabbath was a burden. And Jesus had to bring it back and say, Sabbath is something else, that how you understand. But how could they understand how to fill that time if they did not know who they are? They were so blind about themselves. They thought they were free while they were the prisoners of the devil. They thought they were seeing while they were blind as blind it could be. But Jesus came back and fulfilled the Sabbath. He brought all the light, how Sabbath should be dealt with. Yes, he had closed his carpenter shop on Sabbath, but when he entered the ministry, since Sabbath is now also a day of redemption, we will see it a little bit later, we know that we have to do a work on the Sabbath for the redemption of man. But even his church, who kept the Sabbath, fell apart. And of course, they went back and forth. And in the Middle Ages, when it was darkness of darkness, even though at all times some were keeping the Sabbath, even Luther and the reformers, they were hating the Jews and they were hating the Sabbath. They were blind to it. But in 1850s and 60s, God brought back the light of the Sabbath to his people. And now again, Sabbath is there, but it is, of course, not understood like it should. And so it goes back and forth. And today we have maybe the most darkest part, like in the time of Jesus, the one that don't keep it, or they keep it as a day for themselves. It's pure selfishness that we see today in keeping a day. Oh, we make free, we don't do anything. Is that the purpose of the Sabbath? So it's amazing that if we don't understand the cause of the Sabbath, we don't understand nothing. But we know that Sabbath has a meaning and it will be restored to its right place in the end time. And it will be a sign of those people who belong to him. And then when Jesus comes the second time, he will take those up into heaven, and on earth will be 1,000 years of Sabbath. The earth will be resting, and we will be resting with Christ, the redeemed ones in heaven, having that Sabbath rest that was promised. And we know that 321 after Christ, humans instituted a false Sabbath. They took Sunday instead of Saturday because they said we have the right to change what should be a holy day and what should not be a holy day. And so they changed that. Yes, we have to need a day, and out of the 6, out of the 7, but we put the first day of the week, because then, and they had all these reasons why, but none of them is correct, because they didn't understand what's the purpose. But there will be a group of people, the 144,000, the restored. They will be restored in their heart. And since they are restored in their heart, the Sabbath will be also their outward sign of restoration. So let's conclude. Christ is the Son, the Lord of the Sabbath. He is the one who created it, and he gave him the time frame. It's a day. It's a creation day in which he said, you have to remember that you are a created being. He commanded it himself verbally, and with his finger he wrote it. The manna, the bread from heaven, which is symbolized him, was directly bound to it. Jesus Christ is the manna that comes from heaven. And the Sabbath was close combined to it. He said 6 days the manna comes, and 7 on the 7th you don't go out to bring it. After the incarnation, Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath as we have seen in the overview and brought it back to its original light. And at the end of the controversy, it will be the final sign of distinction between his disciples and those of Satan. The Sabbath is an outward sign of an inward identity. You are mine, says the Lord. Once again, the redemption through Christ and the Sabbath. Christ as God creates man on the sixth day and seals his creation with the Sabbath. Very important. He creates man on the 6 days and he seals the whole creation by creating the Sabbath day. As a man, the same person, that was as a God. Now as a man, Christ puts the false identity to death on the sixth day in himself, and he seals the destruction of that, what he did on the cross, with the Sabbath, lying and resting, sealing the redemption. That's why Sabbath is a day of liberty. That's why Sabbath is a day of equality. There is no difference between any creation, to any human being and the other. We are all at the same children of God. There is a liberty from the self-deception, and Sabbath is the sign of it. As the Sabbath was the sealing of creation, it is now the sealing of redemption. It is, I am freed from the cause that makes me sick, from the cause of suffering, from the self-deception. And now Christ, as the new creature, the one that resurrected, is not the one that died. I mean, it's the same person, but now it's a new creature. Everything was made new in the Christ that resurrected from the death. The second Adam. Now he brings, when he comes the second time, the promised Sabbath rest for the redeemed. You see, in Hebrews 4 it says, there is another Sabbath rest. And that Sabbath rest is heaven. That's the promised land. Joshua didn't bring them to the rest, because Joshua and the going out of Egypt and entering the Canaan was just an example of getting out of the misery and the suffering of this earth and coming into the promised land of rest. There's another Sabbath rest. That's the Sabbath rest that is meant in the Bible. It's the rest of the redeemed when everything is changed. Now, the second Sabbath rest is shown in Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. Tell me, what is this Bible verse describing here? It's the unity that is restored between the Creator and his creation. But now this creation is now lifted up to be the sons of God and daughters of God. And here there's a tabernacle, there's a place we live together. Because he is our identity. We are his children. We are his people, and he is our God. That is the Sabbath rest that was promised to Abraham, that was promised from generation to generation, and it was never achieved, and it will be achieved with all of those that have put their trust in God. And then God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. This is the complete removal of every suffering. And he that sat upon the throne said, behold, I make all things new. As out of the old Adam, Christ created a new creature by resurrecting from the death. So God will out of the old earth create a total new one, in which suffering will be not mentioned anymore, will never even be thought of again. Because identity has been restored. Now, as a conclusion, what is the purpose of the Sabbath? Why is it a day of liberty? It frees me from the error of my heart. It makes me aware who I am. It makes me equal with my brother and sister. How can it be that so many Christians who teach the Bible have not understood that Sabbath is not a matter of an institution that God sometimes gave to the Jewish nation? Just recently I saw a comment on someone ask a question to a evangelical leader about the Sabbath, and he answered and said, the Sabbath is just for the old covenant, is just for the Jewish people. And I was thinking in myself, how much did this person understand that Sabbath is a creation of Christ? Like I was created on the 6th day, Christ created the 7th day as a day of rest, as a day of remembrance. Who am I? It's not a thing that you can discuss about. You can either acknowledge who you are, and then Sabbath is the natural result of it. And then you will also know what you can do on Sabbath and what not. What is creating work and what is not creating work. Because God did not stop His work of keeping everything together. Because He made that day for us to remember, and there is a work to do on this day. Because God gave them in Deuteronomy 5, in verse 15, He gave them another reason for the Sabbath day. He said this, and remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. So the Sabbath day is the day of redemption from Egypt. It's the redemption from suffering. The Sabbath day becomes a day of renewal. God never gives up man. And as He did not give up man, He did not give up the Sabbath. He created it for a purpose. And its purpose will always be fulfilled by those who are His people. And the purpose of the Sabbath is a creation work. Not a creation work in this way, a redemptive work. We have to do something for the world on Sabbath. Because it is a day in which Christ worked to free people from suffering. He rested in His carpenter's shop. It was always closed on Sabbath. But when He entered in the work of ministry, His ministry was one of every day of redemption. So He also on Sabbath did the work of redemption. And so we are called. If we know who we are, then we are called to do a work on this day, not for us, but to remember who we are and become active in saving the lost souls of our Father, of our Redeemer who came, lived a life for them, and they are in ignorance that they have a solution out of suffering. I want to be a man that knows who he is, that I'm a created being, total powerless, but I have all power in Him. Like Paul said, I can do nothing out of myself. Jesus said, but on the other hand, I can do all things by Him who strengthens me, which is Christ. So, you see, we are powerless, but we have a source of power. And when we take from them, we can give and serve. And then the Sabbath will be an outward sign of an inward state. If inwardly I'm a child of God, in these last days when God will give the full light, everyone who is His will also keep the seventh day Sabbath holy. And I want to be among them. How about you? Amen.